Sorry, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Regt Parkinson. I'm a major in the reserves, formerly in the regulars, and in my day job, I host or I lead the Armed Forces Christian Union, and I'm the membership director. And this event has been organised by AFCU on behalf of the Defence Christian Network. I hope that all makes sense. In the chat, if one of my team could just post a link to the website. If anyone is interested, there's information about AFCU, a charity that started in 1851 and has been running for over 170 years now, that supports Christians in the MOD, both those in uniform and also civil servants. And if you're interested in joining, membership is free, and just as prayer is free. And so we seek to support all of you. If you are someone who identifies as a person of Christian faith who is serving in the MOD. I think that's more than enough about me. You didn't really come to hear about either me or the AFCU. You came to hear about Chris, and Chris is an interesting character. I'll give a couple of words of introduction and then hand over to him. Originally born in India, I won't give a year, but when it was British in India, which might sort of give an indication of roughly an era at least. He was educated in Dowie School and in obviously the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst, where he was commissioned into the Royal Leicestershire Regiment, which some months later amalgamated or into the Royal Anglian Regiment, and he joined the Parachute Regiment in 1972 and was promoted to Major and served with 10 Para in 1975. But the key bit that I think we're all here to hear is Chris was with 2 Para in the Falklands War, and particularly in the Battle of Goose Green. And I don't want to eat his sandwiches, so I'm not going to say anything more. But Chris, thank you very much for making time to see us at this lunchtime and talk to us. It's over to you, sir.
Well, greetings to you all, and peace be with you. Thank you so much for giving up your lunchtime to take part in this event, supporting the AFCU mission, which is to encourage those who are already Christian in the armed forces to live out and develop their faith, and through them to encourage others to come to a committed faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. My talk is focused on prayer, drawn from my experience, particularly on the battlefield in the Falklands 40 years ago. I aim to state briefly what prayer is, describe my experience of its power, and as a result conclude for what and for whom we could pray. So let me begin by asking, what is prayer? I learned as a kid the famous saying of John of Damascus that prayer was the raising up of the mind and heart to God. In other words, by using our intellect, imagination, and memory, it's possible to express our dependence on God, for without which we cannot achieve anything on our own. We could use various forms: petitionary, thanksgiving, adoration, and supplication as we seek the truth. That is to say, the attitude of looking lovingly at the reality of our life and the world. And we would use our hearts to inspire our will through love to try and serve the good, praying for all sorts of goods: safe travel, physical health, financial security, and so on. I would add the active process of meditation, in which the soul enters dialogue with the person of Jesus Christ, whilst contemplative prayer is the simple expression of a silent love in a gaze of faith fixed on Jesus. But put more simply, it seems to me that prayer is expressed in the sustaining of the personal relationship with God through conversation, a sharing between friends. In this way, any situation can be a source of the conversation. Dear Father, thank you for the food on the table. Dear Father, help me please in this difficult task of communicating with you, and I can't see you and I can't hear you. Dear Father, please grant eternal rest to my friend who died today. Thus, it's quite possible to pray constantly. I call it a chattering away to God. Since God is always reaching out to us, our prayer is simply our response. I know this works out in practice. I will call it prayer and the divine. Many years ago, when I was an officer cadet at the Royal Military Academy, I went on an expedition to Iceland. It involved the collection of a Russian off-road truck and driving it down through the mountains from the north to Reykjavik. In the dark, as I turned round a bend in the track, my vehicle was thrown into a drainage ditch by a rockfall. Having climbed out of the truck and bandaged up the gash in my face, I sat down by the roadside to think about recovery. It was then that I looked up at the night sky. In all my life, I have never seen anything like it, nor have again. With no heat, no pollution, no ambient light, it was utterly astonishing and breathtakingly beautiful, truly perfect. The stars were so tightly packed together they created a celestial dome of light, and when the upturned wheel stopped its squeaky rotating, I was left in silence, complete and utter silence, and yet a silence that was not the absence of sound, but the expression of real presence. Overwhelmed by the astonishing display of cosmic light and in absolute stillness, I realized deeply that I was not alone. I knew from my religious education that God is the God of silence, and it is in silence that God is best heard. But I had never until this sublime moment realized the power of this truth, the power of silence to reveal the presence of God. I was not so much conscious of God, but rather that God was conscious of little me. As I gazed in awe at the splendor of space, I felt embraced by a profound sense of the divine order, the hierarchical arrangement of value in relationship, from the very humblest things through our privileged humanity to the perfection of God in the presence of God's peace of justice, harmony, and independence. I was part of this divine order, which brought my obedience and my love. I now turn to prayer and duty in the preparation of my mind and heart for war. On the night before I left the UK for the Falkland Islands on a North Sea ferry, I put on my boots and ran up onto Salisbury Plain near where I lived. I remember jogging up to a clump of beech trees to see the remains of the dying sun. As I stood in the quiet, I shivered in apprehension as I thought about the coming campaign, my service as an officer, and the possibility of the loss of life. To calm myself, I lowered my head and committed myself and the whole eventual endeavor to God. Whatever happens in this affair, I pray that it will be more than anything else a spiritual experience for me to come closer to you. My God, give me the strength to see and do everything in this way. I was embraced by a deep sense of tranquility and peace as I refocused my mind and heart beyond myself towards Christ and my commitment to do my duty to those I serve. As I went off into the South Atlantic, my prayer moved into the space of war. Let me give you a sit rep. On the 25th of May, while 3 Commander Brigade were consolidating the amphibious landing and the build-up of the logistics under the threatening bravado of the Argentine air assault, the container ship, the Atlantic Conveyor, was hit by 2 AIM-39 Exocet missiles. This setback imposed a serious loss of helicopter lift, which prejudiced the brigade's ability to make a rapid breakout east to seize the capital, Stanley. But under the impatient political orders from Thatcher's War Cabinet, Brigadier Julian Thompson, the brigade commander, was pressurized to take offensive action. The Argentine garrison at the settlements of Darwin and Goose Green, although off the line of march to Stanley, were the nearest enemy locations within tabbing distance of the beachhead, and my battalion, 2 Para, was the closest. The garrison sat astride the East Falklands Central Isthmus and was defended by Task Force Mercedes of the Composite Infantry Regiment 12, with Naval and Air Force personnel, totaling about 1,000 personnel. The grass strip had been used as a Pokhara base, but these lackluster aircraft had been withdrawn to Pebble Island because they could not take off from the mud with a full load. The Argentine defense included 3 105mm pack howitzers, 6 20mm Rheinmetall anti-tank guns, anti-aircraft guns, 2 radar-guided Oerlikon 35mm anti-aircraft guns, and plentiful M2 Browning 50 caliber machine guns, outgunning our own small arms. The brigade mission given to us was 2 Paras to capture settlements of Darwin and Goose Green. It met the 3 critical criteria of any good mission statement: understandable, compelling, and inspiring the zealous will for its achievement. H. Jones devised a night attack plan to advance rapidly down the open, treeless, undulating corridor of grassland, 7 kilometers long and 2 kilometers wide, with 2 companies leading. By 13:30 hours the next day, having cleared the outlying defensive positions, we'd hit the main Argentine defensive line. The battalion attack stalled, and my commanding officer, H. Jones, was killed in action. With my duplicate tech headquarters, I assumed command, and using the contest for the enemy's key terrain on the Argentine right flank as a pivot, created a point of main effort to direct the assault onto the Argentine left flank. Through the brilliant collaboration between the companies, we broke through the Argentine defense, occupied Darwin, and encircled Goose Green. Later, after the napalm and rocket attack by the Argentine Air Force, our own Harrier cluster bomb response, and the reinforcement of the Argentine garrison by yet another rifle company, the situation at dusk was bleak. Our slender resources were almost exhausted, especially the belted ammunition for the machine guns, and no more to run. The Navy frigate HMS Arrow had withdrawn, its gun jammed. The proximity of the houses in the settlement prevented the use of artillery. The battalion was dispersed across the approaches to the settlement, so the cohesion and tempo of our assault was splintered. The polar wind had reduced the temperature to -10 degrees wind chill, degrading the radio batteries. Much more seriously, 1 in 9 of us was either killed or injured. Having not slept for about 40 hours, I struggled to make sense of the situation, knowing the enemy may well counterattack and that I had inadequate reserves. If they did not, and I resumed the assault, it would involve the messy business of fighting in the built-up complex of the settlement. I was then informed that 112 Falkland Island settlers were imprisoned by the Argentine inside Goose Green. Now, not only had we not achieved the mission, but we didn't have the combat power to fight through the settlement to achieve it and release the settlers. I must say I felt the burden of command heavily. I then did what countless soldiers have done down the ages. I knelt in the crowded, burning gully and prayed. It was the prayer of Charles de Foucault, incidentally canonized as a saint just 3 days ago. Charles was a cavalry officer in the French army, then an explorer and geographer, and finally a Catholic priest and hermit who lived among the Tuareg in the Sahara in Algeria. Here is the prayer that I laminated and kept in my smock pocket. It's a prayer of abandonment to God's will. My Father, I abandon myself to you. Do with me as you will. Whatever you may do with me, I thank you. I'm ready for anything. I accept everything. Provided your will is fulfilled in me and in all creatures, I ask for nothing more, my Father. As I concluded the prayer, the sense of despair suddenly fell away. In place of the confusion, indecision, and uncertainty, I knew exactly what action I ought to take. I felt at peace. I would change the mission. I sought the brigade commander's approval to alter capture to rescue the settlers, which could be achieved through the offer of a surrender of the garrison. This will be backed up by a firepower demonstration on some waste ground should the negotiations need some significant steel. If that failed, we would resume the fight. During the night, I drafted a note in English and Spanish demanding the release of the settlers and the Argentine surrender. I released 2 prisoners of war to transmit the message to their leaders with an ultimatum to return by 1000 hours in the morning. They returned on time. I walked down accompanied by my battery commander with our artillery laid on a hut on the airstrip where we planned to meet the enemy. Significantly, their first words to me were, "Thank God you've come." Indeed, a prayer of thanksgiving. During the surrender negotiations, the Army, Navy, and Air Force commanders agreed to lay down their arms so long as they could form up, say their prayers, and sing their regimental songs. This they did, and we entered Goose Green to release the imprisoned settlers. Let me conclude by focusing prayers for those whom we could pray and for what we could pray. Freedom. Only the legitimate pursuit of peace can redeem the loveless outrage of the battlefield, absolve the nation of any ethical guilt, and preserve the warrior's nobility of moral purpose for a just cause. The Falklands War was and is about freedom, each person's reasoned capacity to make a moral choice for their own good, the other's good, and the common good, without fear, duress, or coercion, simply the activity of love. Let us pray for all who walk. Let us pray for all who work for the cause of freedom. Liberty. The conflict was not just about who owned what rock in the South Atlantic. It was about liberty, the pursuit of the community's legitimate interests through their own self-determination. Indeed, the Falklands conflict awakened a renewed respect for the United Kingdom's reputation to defend natural rights by restoring the liberty to the traumatized island settlers and indirectly collapsing the cruel junta and relieving the Argentine sorrow, epitomized by the widows wailing outside the Casa Rosada for their freedom. Out of evil comes good. Let us pray for the flourishing of the peoples of the Argentine. Democracy. The ideals of liberty and freedom in the cause of a just peace is our British democratic legacy, which commands the defense of the island's claim to their homeland, for which an enduring sacrifice is the warrior's suffering and the family's sorrow. Let us pray for the well-being of the United Kingdom. Our armed forces, good soldiers wage peace, not war. Our armed forces are prepared to place the mission for peace and justice above life and limb, the only cadre of our uniformed citizens required to make such a sacrificial covenant. Despite this dreadful threat, what is remarkable is the dedicated life, service, and sacrifice which soldiers invest over years in fellowship with their comrades to refine their conduct for the fearful time when they place themselves in harm's way when ordered by the state. Let us pray for the dedication and resilience of our armed forces. The warrior. A heavy moral obligation is placed on the frail and gallant warrior, ordered to do what is right and good through the proportional use of violence, with its profound absence of love, in a milieu that is wrong and bad by our normal principles of justice. The values of integrity, courage, respect, and discipline will be unremarkable in the perfect individual. But for the ordinary person who displays these qualities in extraordinary circumstances of conflict is more than just remarkable. It's praiseworthy, admirable, and honorable indeed. Let us pray for the gallant warrior's courage and fortitude, especially under duress. Peace. Let us pray for peace that St. Augustine defined so eloquently for us. The peace of all things is the tranquility of order. Order is the distribution which allots things equal and unequal, each to his own place. Comrades, let us pray that our Christian voices can help each of our comrades in arms to become what God had intended them to be, and for them to serve the particular purpose for which they were created, in this time and in this place. Finally, Christ's words to his disciples at the Last Supper, as recorded by St. John. Peace I leave you, my peace I give you. I do not give you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not let them be afraid. Thank you to each of you for listening, and God bless you.
Chris, thank you very much. Very eloquent and really intriguing. And I don't know if you're tracking any of the comments, but there's been some lovely comments in the chat as well. For those who don't have to dash for meetings and have 15-20 minutes, we will take some, Chris has kindly agreed to take some questions now. And I have seen one in the chat there. If you are able to put the questions in bold, in capitals, that really helps us just to pick them out amongst any other comments that are in there. So, Chris, first question from Helen. Did any of your colleagues come to Christ during the conflict, and were you ever able to openly pray for them?
That's a great question. Helen, did you say Helen?
It was Helen, yes.
Helen, what was interesting, we had a lovely Padre, Padre David Cooper, and he arranged for a church service to happen in one of the reception rooms on the ferry. And he started pretty well the first day we left the UK. 4 or 5 people turned up. Halfway down there, perhaps half the room was filled. The night before we left the ship to do the amphibious landing, the place was packed. And we prayed. Yeah, we prayed for each other, and we prayed for a successful outcome. And I think that really contributed to our success. And so significantly, Helen, was that when we got into Stanley, some weeks later, exhausted and tired and injured, I don't know who gave the order, but the whole battalion assembled on a street in Stanley and marched down to the cathedral. And there we had our final church service.
That's lovely. Thank you, Chris. And I think he's gone now, but I'll, with his permission, I'll put you in touch with somebody who's been in touch with me privately, just to say he was a young private soldier in D Company. He doesn't think he would remember you. It's the first time he's heard your voice for nearly 40 years. So he says it's great to hear you and your reflections, and he's still serving. But I'll put you in touch privately, Chris,
Okay.
with that individual. I'm not sure. I don't have his permission to share his details publicly. Thank you, Chris. Another question here from Perry. During the conflict, were you aware of God's presence and protection on you and your soldiers, and perhaps particularly around Goose Green?
Yes, I was indeed. It was, I can't describe I can't describe it. It just felt like a presence, and that somehow whatever needed to be done, I knew what to do. It was the extraordinary, sense of real presence that I tried to describe in that lonely moment in Iceland. I'll give you an example. Before Goose Green, we had a Harrier attack, and one of the Harriers was shot down by one of those anti-aircraft guns that I described. And I was really keen to find the pilot because he'd bailed out. And I asked the settlers, did you see it? Did you see the airplane? And nobody had. Until I met a woman, a mother, who said, as a matter of fact, I was in the loo at the time. And I heard this noise, and I think I heard the bang of the aircraft being hit. And I said, show me the loo. And I took her into the loo and looked out of the little window. And she said it went straight down that way, and pointed to a little low hummock. So I took out my compass and took a bearing, and then went back to my map and put the line of the bearing on the map. And right at the far end of the bearing was a little square which said Shepherd's Hut. And I turned to my left and a helicopter landed. And I said to this guy, John Greenhalgh, will you go to that hut there? I think you'll find a RAF pilot. And 20 minutes later, there was Bob Iverson with his boots ruptured and a bruised head in front of me. Now, I can't explain any of that, but it was a sense of being cared for. I think that's the best I can do.
Thank you, Chris. An interesting question from Hannah, which may be related to that. And there's a couple of questions about your sense of being protected by God. But the question is, if your involvement in the Falklands had gone badly wrong, but you live to tell the tale, would you still be a Christian today? And there's a couple of follow-ups. Or would you have turned away from God?
No.
Was it only because of the power of God's grace during the Falklands that you are a Christian today?
Well, I started out as a cradle Catholic, and I felt the power of faith all through my life. I mean, I haven't been a very good Christian, but I felt the power of it. And had things gone badly wrong, I would still be a Christian, of course. Things go right, things go wrong. And faith is one of the ways in which we sustain our commitment to listening for God's will. I think that's the key, really, is to listen for God's will. He's obviously a strategic player because he can see the big picture. How can you see a little bit of it? And when things don't make sense to me, that's my ego talking. I think we have to relax a bit and say, the world is in good hands, and God knows what he's doing, even if I can't understand it particularly well. And I think that applies to the very moments we're living through now. Maybe there's a big, grand reason why we have a war in Ukraine and why there's so much turmoil. Maybe we collectively have not kept God at the center of our lives and replaced it with other gods like wealth and power and pleasure and these other attractions that only the world provides.
Thank you, Chris. I would, if I may, I would add that, being a Christian following God doesn't guarantee us surviving battles or an easy life. It gives us a sense of peace and direction as we navigate our way through life, whatever challenges we face. I've got a question actually from a colleague, a friend of mine in Brunei, who's very involved in, I think he's the secretary, if I've got the appointment right, with the Catholic Military Association, been very involved in setting it up. But Francis's question, and he's listening with his boys in Brunei now. I think it must be mid-afternoon, late afternoon, evening there. I've carried St. Charles de Foucault's prayer with me and prayed it throughout my career, especially in tougher times. Prayer is incredibly powerful. Do you have thoughts on how best to help military people overcome their self-consciousness about prayer?
That's a very difficult question. Do I know the answer to that? Overcome their self-conscious. I don't think I've ever experienced that sense of being self-conscious about prayer. I think, I suppose, the simple answer is more prayer. And if you, I mean, Charles de Foucault, his prayer is terrifying. I mean, it really should have a government warning on it. I mean, if you're seriously saying, look, I abandon my will to you, do with me as you will, you're inviting all sorts of things that you may feel uncomfortable about, the least of which is being self-conscious about prayer. So I think, I'm cupping it a bit here, but I think I would keep praying the prayer, especially the Charles de Foucault one, and take it really seriously and not be preoccupied with our sense of self-consciousness. After all, that's really just an ego trip. Worrying about yourself is not what it's about. It's just a little part of our ego dramas that we create day by day. No, I think we should attend to the theodrama instead.
Thank you, Chris. I guess I would add that part of my journey of coming to faith was I had been taught or heard in churches and other places that prayer was about talking to God. I think what radically changed my life and it was a realization reading an article about God speaking to each of us. And I think as we wait, it is a two-way conversation, as you've alluded to and illustrated so well from the not just the Battle of Goose Green, but we can hear it in your life now. And I know we talked about that last week, how prayer has become, if anything, more and more important as life has gone on for you. Could I ask another question? This one's from William. How did your faith affect your view of the enemy, and was that ever in contrast with members of your own company?
Well, it didn't really. The enemy is a way of just dehumanizing another human being, and we have to use that language in the military to get over the fact that we're actually trying to kill people. I saw the enemy as somebody who had to be defeated, and I was pretty robust about that. And I had a mission to do, and they had infringed some fundamental, both social, political, cultural, religious laws. And they knew it too. They knew it. In fact, I'll tell you a short story first time. I was rung up by a Methodist who said, I've been in contact with a sergeant in the Argentine army. This was well after the war ended. And he wants to meet you. And he's saved up some money to come to the UK. Would you meet him? So I said, yeah, sure. So I met this guy, Sergeant Horacio Benitez. And he explained that in the Battle of Goose Green, he'd been hit in the head by a ricochet in the head and was left for dead by his comrades. Anyway, one of our medics found he had a pulse, and we picked him up and took him to our regimental aid post and bandaged up his wounds and so on. Then he recovered, and then he was shipped back to the Argentine by the UK. Normally the away team brings its own transport, but they'd sugared off back to the Argentine. And so we shipped the entire Argentine army back to the Argentine. And what was interesting, the sergeant told me that when he arrived, the local population wouldn't feed them, wouldn't house them, wouldn't care for their wounds. So he decided the best thing as a sergeant, platoon sergeant, was to look after his own folk. So he built a shelter under a railway arch, and they bottled water and sold it. And eventually they made a living. And he arrived in the UK, and he explained all this to me. And I said, why have you come to the UK to explain all of this? He said, well, that's just the background. The reason I've come to the UK is because I've got a request of you. I said, what is it? And he said, I come on behalf of me, my platoon, my regiment, my army, my country, and I'm asking you for your forgiveness. It's an extraordinary moment. And I faffed around trying to placate this man who was seriously, spiritually and psychologically troubled. And I couldn't think of anything to say. I said, well, of course you're forgiven. I never held anything personally to you. Anyway, after flanneling around for some minutes, I said, Horatio, I had this brainwave. I said, Horatio, what would it be like in the Argentine if the Falklands War hadn't happened? He said, well, the junta would still be in power. The would still be disappearing. No democracy, no freedom, no liberty. More widows. I said, Horatio, we were both on the same side. And at that moment, he smiled and said, yes, okay, I understand now. Again, I think this is God's will emerging for us puzzled citizens of planet Earth.
Thank you, Chris. That's been very powerful. I just want to read a comment in the chat. I don't know if you're monitoring that, but it's from Air Commodore Robert Woods, who says, Chris, I first heard you speak of your experiences 10 years ago when you were talking on practical ethics through your company that I know you went into when you left the army, Praxis. Your thoughts were immensely inspiring and moving then, and are again today. Thank you. Chris,
well, please thank him.
I will do. Hopefully he's still on the call, but I imagine
pleasure's all mine, Chris. The pleasure's all mine.
Oh, bless you.
Bless you. Thank you. And Chris, and that really brings, I think, together what's been an amazing sort of half an hour, 40 minutes with you. An incredible story, very powerful testimony, very challenging. If I may, I think one of the things that certainly chaplains and we definitely in the AFCU are very happy to pray with people to I think forgiveness, as you have powerfully illustrated, is so key to us finding peace, forgiveness, forgiving ourselves, forgiving others, and sometimes even forgiving God. I know there is much talk about for those who are Roman Catholics. I believe there are a number on the call. There is a worldwide association of military Catholics. It's called AMI. Forgive my appalling pronunciation, but it goes something like the Association Militaire Internationale, and it's an opportunity.
Militaire.
Sorry.
Militaire. Very close, Rhett. Well done.
Thank you, Mike. Well done. Mike is one of our vice presidents for the Association of Military Christian Fellowships, which is the equivalent organisation for Protestants as well. I'd like to close with a short prayer, and if anybody wants to, I'm very happy to just briefly mention AFCU and what we do. But let me close with a prayer, and then those who need to get on will be able to get on. I know all of us are in very busy jobs, and there'll be other things. So let me just close briefly. Lord, thank you for this opportunity, and that we were eventually able to work the technology such that Chris was able to join us and speak so powerfully about the importance of prayer and his relationship with you as he presented you with the various issues, particularly in that battle for Goose Green that he faced, the desperate situation. And Lord, thank you that you speak to us, and that in a direct response and obedience to your leading, he was able to take what logically and perhaps militarily was not the obvious approach, and invite the Argentinians to surrender, and that there was no more loss of life in that particular battle. Lord, for all of us who have been in traumatic situations, we ask for healing and for forgiveness, both that we might forgive others and forgive ourselves. And Lord, we pray that you'd help each of us to continue to ponder what Chris has said, and maybe work that through with you in however we are able to relate to you. Would you draw us closer into a relationship with you, Father God? And we ask all these things in Jesus' name. So, Chris, thank you so much. Lots of comments in the chat. The recording will be made available on the DCN YouTube channel, and we'll endeavour to send that out. If anybody specifically is worried about not getting that, please drop an email to Gemma in the office, and that is her email is office@afcu.org.uk. For those who are interested, I was halfway through when we started, as Chris was able to join us, just mentioning that AFCU does 4 things. We're here to pray. We pray particularly for our armed forces and for our nation. In fact, we have a prayer time on Zoom at midday for half an hour every day, and that's one of many different prayer initiatives that we follow. If you're serving and you'd like to be prayed for specifically, then we would love to pray for you. If you haven't joined AFCU, that information is online, and I'm sure somebody can post the link in the chat briefly. And we will link you to some of our amazing prayer groups that are up and down the country, and many of them are retired military personnel who would be very happy and can intelligently pray for you and your family, your situation, on an enduring basis, that is. The other things that we do, just briefly, we organise 20 to 40 events a year. This weekend, I'm working. Some would argue that I'm not working very hard because I'll be surfing and kayaking in the North Devon coast with about 25 others who we're there to share our Christian faith and really get to know each other, build relationships. And that's one of many events that we run throughout the year. Again, if you want further details, they do come up from time to time on AFCU website on the events page. Please look on those, and we'd love to see you at one of our events. We have a number of ministries, which ministry areas that put those on. We have a youth ministry, particularly to 11 to 18-year-olds. So if you have kids at that age, then do look at the summer camp and sending them on summer camp. It's been absolutely fantastic for my kids. They're all in their 20s and they are walking in faith, in part because of what summer camp, Easter camp as it used to be, has done for them. There's men's ministry, women's ministry. We reach out and support marriages, veterans in custody, and various other initiatives there as well. And the last couple of things, we support our members where we can within resources by visiting. If you would like a visit, or you'd like us to come and talk to your Bible study group, fellowship group, we'd love to do that. Please just get in touch with the office, and one of us would love to arrange to come and chat about AFCU. And lastly, we produce a lot of resources. So devotional books, various other bits and pieces, including things like how can we be Christians and follow Christ in an organization that effectively is designed to kill people. I think we've had a few thoughts and ideas from Chris, but if you want more on that or anything else, please again get in touch with the office. Looking forward, there are 2 more talks coming up. One of our speakers, Adrian Nance, was on this call. I did see him and I did see his video briefly, and he'll talk about being down in the Falklands from a naval perspective and as a Christian. And then that's on the 16th of June. And then in July, we have Ivor Hellberg, who is involved in the logistics support for the Falklands. Adrian, thank you. You're still here. I can see that in the chat. Great to have you, and very, very much look forward to hearing what you have to say on the 16th of June. And Ivor Hellberg will be with us in July. Again, look out for details of his talk. Again, another very committed Christian to talk. Adrian, do you want to give us a quick 1 minute spiel, and then I'll close the call. But brief little whet our appetite for what's coming in 16th of June.
Well, it's been lovely. Thank you for that offer. It's been lovely to hear Chris again. From my perspective, I ended up in a ship that sank. I wasn't actually in it when it sank, but we were hit and we had to deal with the issues of when things aren't going right as a Christian. And things aren't going right militarily as a Christian. So that may be a bit of an appetizer. Wonderful.
Adrian, perfect. Thank you. And we very much look forward to hearing what you have to say on the 16th of June. It just remains for me as we land at 1 o'clock to say on behalf of all of us, Chris, thank you. Thank you for your time preparing your talk, your answering of questions, and thank you most of all for just a real example of a man of prayer who loves the Lord and serves him faithfully. So really appreciate that, and I very much hope we'll meet up with you again, if not in the office for lunch as we did last week, then again face-to-face some opportunity. But great talk, and really appreciate time and your time speaking to us today.
Thank you, Rhett, and thank you for the invitation, and thanks to Rebecca for helping me get in contact with you. Take care. God bless.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us, and yeah, including from Bahrain, that's great, and from Brunei. And from the Isle of North Uist, Alan, lovely to see you. Thank you. God bless, and take care, everyone. Goodbye.